Welcome to the Live Greater podcast. Today we have on Kelly Sparta. She is a transformational shaman, energy healer, psychic, medium, channel, empath, sound healer, and spiritual teacher extraordinaire. Her almost 50 years of study in personal growth, metaphysics, psychology, energy work, religion, occult practices, alchemy, NLP, Chinese medicine, herbalism, and more give her a unique view, allowing her to break down the silos between various practices to see the whole. And I love that because I think there's not just one thing for anything. You need to, there's a bigger picture, right? Everything kind of flows together. So welcome, Kelly.
Thank you. It's so glad to be here, Shelley. It's great to be on the show and happy to be talking to you today.
Thank you. So I wanted to start off by asking you what got you into the energy work, all this type of field.
All the stuff.
Yeah.
My mom, actually.
Okay.
My mom said I was talking to ghosts in my crib.
Oh.
And she had been psychic when she was younger, and it had scared her, and she shut it down, and she was never able to figure out how to turn it back on again. And she was absolutely committed to the idea that I would not end up the same way. And
Okay.
so that combined with her divorce that happened when I was 5, which sent her on this huge, personal growth journey for herself.
Mhm.
And because she made me her partner in life from the time I was like 2, so, wherever she went, I was going with her, was the idea. And so, our entire life was spent listening to cassette tapes, because I'm old, and cassette tapes of, all the personal growth gurus and all of the spiritual people. So Seth and Ram Dass and Abraham Hicks and JC Knight and messages from Michael. And we read all the books and we listened to all the tapes, and we sent away for the courses that you had to like tear the thing out of the back of the book and just snail mail it in to get the course. We did all of that my entire childhood. And she took me out for psychic development classes, and I was reading tarot cards by the time I was 12. I'm doing self-hypnosis from the time I was 10. She just immersed me in it. And it's the closest I think you can come in sort of non-tribal life to being apprenticed.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
From the time of birth, I didn't even know what shamanism was until I was like, I want to say like 30. And
Okay.
so I'd never even come across it or anything like that. And yet I was raised like a shaman apprentice would be raised, which was really interesting.
Yeah. So can you explain a little more about what a shaman is? Because I've heard of that for tribal purposes, but yeah.
So if you ask 100 shamans what a shaman is, they'll give you 100 different answers.
Okay.
So let me just start with that. Okay. Because shamanism is very personal. It's a very personal process. And so in the sort of gross generalized terms, shamans are the translator for spirit for their tribe. They talk to their guides and to the ancestors, and they provide communication across that. They are connected through, the average shaman is something akin to priest, therapist, doctor, and marriage counselor. Yeah.
Okay.
So a little bit of everything, right? And so, we have a wide variety of tools that we use based on our own personal gifts. And so each person has their own sort of focus. I am less of the traditional shaman, which, you think of like sweat lodges and things like that. I don't do those. I hate the heat, but and right today, I really hesitate, despite the fact that I am a shaman, I hesitate to use the term because in the US, it has become almost synonymous with ayahuasca journeys and plant medicine journeys. And that is not true. Okay. I just want to say all shamans do not do that. And in fact, a lot of shamans don't do that. And so, just because somebody says shaman doesn't mean they do plant medicine. And I don't do that either. But I do transformational work because that's my ballywick. That's what I work on. And so I am an initiatrix. So I initiate people from one state of being in their evolution to the next, right? So I stand in the doorway of initiation. I open the door and I go, "Hey, you want to come in?" And people either say yes or no, right? But so there's a whole process to that. It's how do you evolve yourself from one state of being to the next? What do you need to expect? What happens along the journey? How do you get stuck? How do you get unstuck? What are the spiritual bypass things that happen along the way? All of those things are things that I work with. And then I work on the energetics in general. How do you manage your energy field? How do you connect into the universe? How do you talk to your guides? How do you work with manifestation? All of the things, right?
Okay. So I thought that it's interesting that, yeah, someone has to have that desire for change. It's just not going to happen. Like you said, you're at the door to help them, but they need to take that step to come to the door. Right.
Yeah.
So what is that?
Even if they're,
Go ahead.
Sorry. Even if they're ready, sometimes they're not ready, right? They're like, I want it, but their head is saying, yes, I'm going to go through the door. And their hands and feet are like propped on the door going, So, that's resistance, right? We go through our own resistance, and our there are natural things in our process. The ego has to die to get from one state of being to the next. And the ego doesn't want to die. It has a survival mechanism. And so therefore, you end up with resistance patterns and that you have to address and things like that.
So what does that look like for someone who's just never got into that, this transformation process?
Yeah. So something like that would be, I want to let go of my limiting belief that there is never enough. Right. And so I just have to tell you, I picked this one because there's a refrigerator in your background. And in my childhood, when I was growing up, anytime my mother would get paid once a month, and at the end of the month, there would be no food in the fridge. Wow. And she would be complaining that we were broke. And so in my world, when the fridge is empty, we're broke. Well, it doesn't matter how much money's in the bank account. I feel broke if the fridge is empty.
Right.
So, but that's a limiting belief. That's sort of a way that a limiting belief can get sewn into your psyche, right? And so if you have a limiting belief that says there's never enough, right? Then if your mind says, well, I'm going to let go of that, I'm going to come into an abundance mindset. I want to step into the knowingness that the universe takes care of me, that everything is always good, that it's all good enough, and there's always enough, and I'm always enough, right? Your brain goes, yes, that sounds amazing. And your ego goes, but if we believe that, then we have to accept that we are also powerful because we're responsible for our own experiences. And if we have to be responsible for our own experiences, then we have to be responsible for, usually if you're in a lack-based mindset, you're also in a codependent mindset. And so it goes here, it goes, and then we have to be responsible for everybody else. And I can't be responsible for everybody else. Right. There's
too much responsibility going on.
Right. And there are layers of beliefs that tap onto each other. And if you can say, I want to change this one thing, but if you've got 6 others underneath it that are hooked in that you're not letting go of yet, that'll create a resistance pattern.
Right. And I think that's interesting because I think that the one that you picked about abundance mentality or scarcity mentality it is prevalent. It is such a big thing. And there are so many layers to it. You can get over it with one issue, but it's still there maybe for others, a deeper issue or further in. So I think that's a good example. And with that, I guess it's just a lot of mindset work that you help people with, right? Just working through that.
Yeah. So about half. So in the beginning, so there are multiple stages that people go through in this work. Okay. So, there's the process of deciding that you want more out of life, which is what I call the discovery stage. It's like, there's got to be more to life than this. Right. And that discovery stage takes you into this journey of, looking and seeing if there, different places to see if you can find an answer. Right. And that often brings people into the spiritual world and they go, does this stuff really work? And they start doing some research to try and figure it out. And that leads to the next stage, which is what I call the proof and proselytizing stage, which is, oh my God, this stuff really works. I must tell everyone I know and drag them out to classes with me so they don't think I'm crazy, right? And so that's the proof and proselytizing phase. And then you move into the third phase, which is prove that not only is it possible, but I can do it, right? And then it's also takes you into the spiritual orientation / spiritual addiction phase. So in the course of trying to prove that you can do it yourself, you have to get oriented to the spiritual world because you're walking into an entirely new world. And so a lot of that is you don't know what you need to know. And therefore you just sort of go out and buy a whole bunch of different books. You got a stack of books 6 high on the side table of your bed. You got another stack 4 high next to your chair in your living room. And you're partially reading all of them at different times. You pick them up and because you don't have a curriculum. You don't know what you're supposed to do. Right. And so you're in this orientation phase, but you don't really have a structure to how to orient. And therefore it becomes this, I just have to consume more. I'm going to, binge 6 podcasts and watch 40 videos on YouTube and take a bunch of online classes and maybe go to a couple of retreats and, study with somebody and have a session here and a session there and buy 40 crystals and, all the stuff. Right. And all in the service to trying to figure out how to orient here. But then it becomes that the process of trying to orient becomes the goal instead. And so it becomes this addictive consumption of information with the idea that the consuming of the information will solve your problems. And that's not actually the case. Your problems will not be solved by anything outside of you. It's all solved inside of you.
Yeah.
And so, when you figure that out, when you let go of the search for the magic pill that will solve all your problems, that's when you begin to go into stage 4, which is retreating for reflection and being able to really start to do your inner work. And so there are stages when you get to stage 4, there are stages that you go into. The first thing you have to do is you have to orient to, you have to find mental, emotional, and energetic safety. Because until you find that, you do not have the bandwidth to grow because you're spending too much time in fear, anxiety, worry, dread, self-doubt, inner and outer judgments, all the things, right? Your brain is just busy going la 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 la. Danger, Will Robinson, danger, right? And so, I'm dating myself again. And but that's what happens. And so you have to get to that point and you have to get that done. Now, when you do that, it'll cut your stress levels in half. Half your stress will just be gone because all of the anxiety and stuff is gone. Now that requires perspective shift. And I know it took me a long while to get to your answer, but I did.
That's okay.
But that requires a lot of perspective shift and a lot of understanding of the whys around why we are the way we are and how we operate and how to shift those things. It's literally rewiring your brain so that you experience the world differently. There's a lot of personal growth programs out there that will teach you how to manage your upset after you're upset. But I'm a big fan of how about we change the way you think so that you never get upset in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's the perspective shift on the first stage. And the second stage, you're really working on solidifying your energetic container, which is your identity, your sense of self. We're not talking about your aura here. We're talking about your literal identity and how you perceive yourself, who you perceive yourself to be. In a lot of cases, we came up through environments where we weren't allowed to be ourselves. We had to be a reflection of whoever, of the expectations of whoever it is that was in charge, right? And when
you create that perception that that's the way you're supposed to be, right?
Yeah, that too. Yeah, absolutely, that can happen. And so either way, you don't give yourself permission to have an identity of your own. And so there's a need to create your own space for yourself. So, that process is, claim your space, set your boundaries, own your power, internalize your sense of value, learn how to love yourself. And along the way, you need to empty the well of rage so that you're not raging on people, because you won't be able to own your power if you're still raging on people. Because you have a thing that goes, oh, I can't be more powerful. Look at what I do when I'm angry already, right? And so you have to empty that. And then you also have to open your heart. And so that you can receive love. It's not that we don't give it. We just don't receive it. That's the piece, right?
Yeah.
And so all of those things together allow you to solidify your sense of self, your energetic container, and to become comfortable in your own skin. And from there, you can do the work to what we call in the business shadow work, right? To really dig out the parts of you that are hiding in the shadows because you don't want to look at them, right?
Yeah.
Now, the second stage, half of it is perspective shift too, because we're still doing that work from the first stage. But the other half of it is when you actually begin to start doing some of the work. You start to identify your stories. You start to really be able to be alone with yourself and be able to be still in your thoughts and be present in the moment instead of living in the future, worrying about the future, or living in the past, dreading and upset about the past. So you start to be able to be present, and that has its own process as well, because you can't change anything in your life until you can be present right here and now,
Right.
because this is the only place from which change happens, right?
Yes.
So, that's the piece. So that was a very long answer to a short question, but it was important.
Yes, there's a lot of layers, like you were saying. There's a lot of steps, and to uncover certain levels of where you are mentally, I mean, it's a process.
Yeah.
And then just a lot of internal reflection. I think that's sometimes can be hard. For me, I'm a busy person. Like, I like to be doing things. And so to be still, I can be still in nature. That's my go-to place. But to just journal, things like that, it takes effort. And to really ask yourself questions and be honest too, allow yourself to open up to those stories, right? That are hiding. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, a lot of us hold these beliefs that say, I can't hold anymore. I'm already overdone. I can't do my work because I can't hold it. I can't take more than what I've got on my plate now. Mm-hmm. And that's just patently not true. I mean, you're already holding the stuff that's hurting you. Right. You're just not looking at it, but you are holding it. And so, would you like to spend a little longer just looking at it and then be able to let it go than having to hold it for the rest of your life and feel like you're full all the time? Right.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, is it not necessarily pleasant in the beginning? Yes, it is. It can be challenging, but the length of the challenge versus the length of the beneficial outcome is like night and day, right? It's like,
right.
Yeah, let's be challenged for a few months, and then everything feels better for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah.
That's a good time investment, right?
Yeah. Because I think that you're holding on to it and you're afraid of the change because you don't know what that's going to be like. But it is a relief, but you've felt the weight so long that you're just afraid.
Well, it's your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is a negative comfort zone.
Right. Well, I mean, most people's comfort zones are pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right? I really don't like the term comfort zone because it implies, and I've had a lot of people say, I thought it meant it's where you're comfortable. It's like, no, it's what you're used to.
Yes,
it should be
that's
your
better.
familiar zone, not your comfort zone, right? Because what's familiar is not necessarily comfortable. In fact, it's often not comfortable, right?
Yeah. And we need to get out of that familiar zone, right? So we can grow and just have that better life.
Yeah. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my rule for my students. I'm like, they're like, I'm like, are you feeling uncomfortable? They're like, yeah. I'm like, great job. Like, go you, right? You're uncomfortable. Perfect. Yes,
you're in progress. Yeah.
Yes. Well done.
So with all this change, it will, I wanted to talk about law of attraction a little bit and how with this change of yourself, then you'll be able to start attracting really what you want. Is that true?
Yes, it absolutely is. So here's the thing. So law of attraction's got a lot of different layers to it, right? And the one that most people know is, well, visualize and then try to feel how you would feel, right? That's what most people think of as law of attraction. Now, that works, but if you want the most powerful version of law of attraction, is imagine the life you want and then engineer yourself to become the person who will have that life. because when your identity is aligned with the life that you want, that is the most powerful form of law of attraction, because you already are the person who has it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let me see if I can give you an example. Okay. So right now, in January, and I've been working on this for longer than that, but in January, I had a psychic reading from a friend, and she said, "You're going to be a household name by the end of the year." And I immediately went, "What? No, I don't want to be famous." Because in my head, speaking of limiting beliefs, right? In my head, being famous meant having no freedom, having to be locked away in my house with security guards and gates and fences and stalkers and all the stuff, right? And I was like, I hate that idea. Why would I want that? No. And I had been working on the idea of this for a while because, I recognized that it was limiting my ability to get my message out, which was super important. And,
Right.
it's like, any day now, we've been waiting on you. Come on.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but no. Right. So, my inner child's going, no, little temper tantrum of my 2-year-old. And what was so funny is that
you liked your familiar zone. So
yeah, oh, totally my familiar zone.
You wanted to reach more people, but in your familiar zone. Yeah,
exactly. And so I started really looking at what's the opposite side of the coin. It's like, well, maybe that's true. I don't even know that that's true because, being famous in the spiritual world is a very different thing than being famous, right? And, to me, Wayne Dyer is really super famous. And I walk around, I ask people in town and they're like, I have no idea who he is. Right. So I'm like, okay. So, it's a very different animal. And so I started looking at, well, what does it mean? What are the opposite sides? What are the benefits? I started really like, if I were to embrace this, what would it look like? Right now, here's the funny thing. When you really start doing that inner work, you really start stepping into the new identity, the universe conspires to help you. So out of the blue, when I started this about, I don't know, like 10 months ago, and she hit me with it hard in January, but out of the blue, and I can't remember exactly when, but somewhere in that time frame, Neil Donald Walsh's people reached out to me to ask me to have him on my podcast. Now, speaking of famous names in spiritual world, right? He wrote Conversations with God and 14 other books, right? He was one of the seminal authors for me when I was coming back into spirituality when I was 28 and getting everything going. And so I was like, yeah, I'll have him on my podcast. Yeah, I want to talk to him. And I talked to him and I was like, what's your life like? I need to understand what your life is like. And he's like, well, I can't go out to dinner anymore. And I'm like, why? He said, because everybody walks up to me and starts talking to me. And I got the impression he really just doesn't like to talk to people, right? And certainly not interrupting his dinner, right? And then the funniest thing happened is that I live in Panama and there's a company here that does relocation tours, and they did a video of us and they put it out. Now, cool. 5 days after he and I had that conversation where I was like, oh, but he said, I don't have security guards at my house. I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to, he's like, I have security when I go to large events. That's part of my contract, but that's it. I was like, oh, okay. So 5 days later, I'm walking into the pizza place in town and somebody goes, it's you. And I was like, who? She's like, it's you. I know. Where? Who? And yeah, she had seen me on the video for the relocation tour company, and she was like, "Oh my god, that's so great!" Blah 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 blah. And I looked at her and went, "Fabulous! You want to join us for dinner? Because I like people, right?" And we had the best conversation for like 2 hours. I was happy to help and cool. Answer questions and whatever. And I was like, "Oh, this is not going to be a problem for me because I like people, right?" And so, and then I'm like, well, okay. And I was kind of getting okay with it. And then out of the blue, I get this message from a friend of mine, had not seen it online. She just sent it to me direct. And she said, John Rice Davies is going to be in Boquete. Now, I don't know if you know who he is. He's the guy who was the dwarf Gimli in The Lord of the Rings. Okay. He was Gimli in that. He was the professor in Sliders. He's a very well-known actor. And, I would say he's probably, B plus actor, right?
Okay.
In terms of the ratings and
Uh-huh.
and so he's like well known. And he came into town. We're a 25,000 person town in the middle of nowhere, Panama. Okay. And I'm like, why is John Rice Davies in town? And turns out he was high school sweethearts with a woman who was running one of the local charities here in town. And she was doing a fundraiser, and he came into town to help her raise money to buy books for kids.
Cool.
And so he's in town with his daughter. And we're one of two people in line at the time that we were there. And so we got to spend 20 minutes talking to him and his daughter about what their life was like.
Oh, wow.
And this is what I mean when I say the universe conspires to help you.
Right.
And she's like, yeah, some days we walk through town and nobody notices him. And other days he gets mobbed with people asking for autographs. And she's like, it's fine. I'm like, do you have security? She's like, oh, only in countries that are dangerous. And I'm like, that's awesome. Right.
Yeah.
Like, okay, maybe I could do this. Right. So
right. Yeah.
when you step into the identity, the universe conspires to help you.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
It helps you overcome that limiting belief.
Yeah. Right. And my intention was to overcome that limiting belief. My intention was to step into the space that I've been being called into.
Yeah.
And to stop putting my hands and feet at the door and going, no. Right.
Right.
We all have our resistances. It's just, the further you get along in your journey, the more you go, oh, look, I'm in resistance, instead of going, I don't know why this isn't working. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to just be open to not pushing back, just to let it be, let it happen. And like you said,
depends. Some things you have to push back, some things you don't.
Okay.
So if you're in avoidance, then you just, the answer to avoidance is just do it. That's the pushback. Right.
Okay.
It's like, if you know that you're just avoiding something, just stop avoiding it and do it. That's one of the reasons why I tell people, look, if you're dreading something, make it the first thing you do that day rather than the last thing you do.
Right.
Because it'll draw the energy out of the entire day. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's the same idea with resistance. If it's just an avoidance resistance, it's just do it.
I love that little tip, actually. Just start your day off with the hardest thing that you don't want to be doing. And then
Absolutely.
it frees up the rest of your day, your mind, your spirit, just everything is lighter.
Do the hard thing first. And then you have the sense of accomplishment. You're like, oh, I can breathe now. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you suggest for someone who wants to step into their true identity and they're kind of afraid to accept that? What would be their first steps?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is you are already your true self.
Mm.
You're not broken. You're not missing anything. You are already your true self. You've just forgotten how to see it.
Okay. Yeah.
My friend Kathy has a beautiful imagery that I love to use, this metaphor. She says we are all artisanal wells, springs, right? Mm-hmm. We're all natural springs, and we just have all this water that just comes out. It's all of us, right? We're just like, wee. And over the course of time, life, our parents, society, whatever, throws garbage on top of our wells. Mm-hmm. And eventually that garbage gets heavy enough that it weighs down the spring, and the water is no longer springing forth. It's just sort of seeping around the edges, and then more garbage gets thrown in, and now there's no evidence that there was a spring there at all, and all we have is the rainwater that collects in the well, and we begin to believe that we are the rainwater, and that creates the limiting beliefs, because when it's hot and it hasn't rained in a while, then we have very little. And when it rains a lot, we're like, oh, there's an abundance. It's like, yeah, but that's not you, right? Mm-hmm. So remember, you are not the rainwater. You are not the garbage. You are the well that's underneath the rainwater and the garbage, right? And so the process is literally the process of just scooping out the garbage to get down to the well that is you. There's nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. You are perfect exactly as you are. The only thing you have to do is get underneath the garbage, right? Yeah. And people think it's a scary thing. I'm like, but the garbage is already there. You've already seen it before. Every piece of garbage you saw when it walked in the door, it's not new. It's not surprising, but we think, oh, how do I hold that? What do I do with it? How is it scary? And, the answer is it's not as hard as you think it is. And that fear is a resistance. right?
Yeah.
That every time you go into that judgment cycle, that's the resistance too. Every time you judge yourself and you're like, oh, I suck at this, I'm not doing it well, blah, 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 I'm not good, blah, right? Every time
Adding
you do
to
that,
the garbage.
you're adding to the garbage, and you're
Yeah.
just wasting time for getting back on the path, right? You're like, oh, I screwed that up, it's not good, blah, right? No, it's okay, right? It's not a big deal.
Right.
And so, you know, the thing that I would say is the biggest fear that gets in people's way is the fear of the unknown. And you were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
The first thing I'm going to say is the fear of the unknown is not about being able to figure out what the unknown is. Getting past that is not about that. It's about coming into a place where you recognize and acknowledge your ability to adapt. And it's like, look at me. I have made it through all these different situations. I have been successful at navigating all of these different environments. I can do this. I have survived so much. This isn't going to kill me, right? I don't know what it's going to be, but I will figure it out because I have always figured it out, right? And when you can do that, then the fear of the unknown really dampens down dramatically, because you're like, whatever it is, I'll figure it out.
Yeah. That's
right?
Good. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
And I think that is, getting rid of the garbage and seeing the good, seeing what your accomplishments, no matter how small. Right.
Yeah. That's really a hard one to get people to embrace. I have an assignment like that in my first program in my series. And it's the biggest resisted exercise is the seeing your own good stuff.
Yeah.
That is
one
people do not do. And I just have to come back and say, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do that? And no. And I'm like, okay, do it and you'll feel better. I promise. But yeah.
That is so good. So is there something else you would like to share with us before we close today?
Oh, so many things. Where do I start?
Yeah.
So I do want to say this, right? Because what I see, and this has been a shift in the last few years, right? And basically since the pandemic really put everybody into burnout, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've seen is that before the pandemic, everybody was really leaning into the personal growth side of things. And after the pandemic, everybody's leaning into the magic stuff, right? They're like, oh, I want to do law of attraction. I want to do energy healing. I want to talk to angels. I want to talk to my spirit guides. I want to blah, blah, blah. Right. And
that's an interesting shift.
It is an interesting shift. And so what I want to say is that you can't do one without the other. Okay. As you do your work on your inner self, you will automatically have more connection to your guides. You will automatically have more connection to your intuition. You'll automatically have a lot of this stuff. It's going to open up at a deeper level. It won't open up hugely until you really start to focus on it, but it is available to you. If you're doing the spiritual work and you're not doing the personal growth work, it will be a huge limiting factor on your ability to be more powerful and effective as a spiritual worker, because your limiting beliefs will get in the way of your ability to do your work. And so you really need to do both at the same time. That's why everything I do has the two combined, because they are integral to your beingness. And sometimes, doing your personal growth work, you get stuck, and it's because something's stuck in your energy field. And if you're not doing the energy work along with the personal growth work, then you're going to get stuck along the way there too. Right. Yeah. And because we store things in the body, we store things in our energy fields, we have, all kinds of stuff. Right.
Yeah.
So that's issue number one. Issue number two is I just want to put a little ding in people's bonnets here for this. There are 100,000 people on the planet right now whose job it is to help everybody else up level. And they're destined to be the teachers and the healers for everyone else. And I just want to give a description of what it feels like to wake up and as one of those people, so that so your listeners, if they're one of those people, will recognize themselves in this. And that is, you wake up and you go, oh, I have this huge mission. I don't know what it is. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know how I'm supposed to prep. I feel completely inadequate to the task. I don't know how to not feel inadequate. I am overwhelmed at the thought of it, but I desperately want to do it, and I'm late. Okay. All of that. Sound familiar? Yeah. You're one of the 100,000. Welcome. So what that means is that you're part of the 100,000 here to help up level the planet. And there's a whole shebang of stuff. And so the first thing I'm going to say to you is don't panic, because you are not supposed to. It is a massive mission. It is a massive mission, and you're not doing it alone. You're doing one piece of it. I know you feel the entirety of the mission because we're all connected in that way, but each person's doing their part, right? We're a cog in the big machine, right? Which is why you don't always see the big picture, right? You see your cog, right? And so, my wake up happened like 25 years ago with this. And I was like, oh, because on top of it, I saw this, being a well-known figure thing. And I was like, oh no, right? I was just like, I can't do that. That's so big, right? So, there's the I'm late is, I don't understand the I'm late, because we're right on time, but it shows up as I'm late. I think it's really more a function of our inner beingness and us finding fault with ourselves, right? And being like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm late. It's already going, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I think that's part of it, because it has been in progress for a while. And I think that's where we get the I'm late from.
And that time is not an eternal thing. It's a mortal thing. And so we're mortal. So it's just like we hold on to the time when that really isn't a factor.
Exactly. Yeah. So, we've got all of the stuff, right? And so, part of it is just about learning how to orient yourself to the spiritual world, and learning how to make sure that you are in touch with your guides on a regular basis, so you can get the information and the guidance that you need to take the right next step, right? We don't need to know the big plan. We just need to take the inspired action that's in front of us.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a hard part for us control freaks, right? It's like, they're like, but no, I have to know. Like, right. Oh, maybe not so much, right? I spent my first 5 years with my guides telling them where they could go when they would tell me what to do, because I was so stubborn. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I'm going to do this. And eventually I would do what they said. And I'm like, shut up. Like, shut up. I don't want to hear the fact that you told me this. Blah, 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 blah. It took me 5 years to get over doing that. I'm freaking stubborn, It's just like, it's okay. They don't get upset. They're just like, it'll be fine. She'll get there eventually.
Yeah. Line upon line. We'll just receive it when we're ready, right?
Exactly. And everything's in right timing, because they'll just bring different people in at different times. I can look back in my timeline and say, yep, missed that connection, here now. Okay, I'll take that one, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, I could see them, and I could sit here and judge myself for missing them, or I could just say I wasn't ready,
right?
And that's okay.
Yeah,
I'm ready now. Well, mostly. Yeah, if you're ready
for that next level. You're getting there, right? It's a continual up leveling.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the next piece that I want to say is, if you are out there seeking for a spiritual teacher and they are not talking about what they are currently working on in their lives, then they're probably not practicing what they preach. So don't learn from someone who doesn't practice what they preach, because they're going to be teaching you stuff they learned in books rather than stuff they really understand. And especially if this is the other piece that makes me crazy right now, is that when I was coming up in the 70s, being a spiritual teacher was the equivalent of being a crackpot, right? Everybody thought that the spiritual teachers were crackpots.
Yeah.
And therefore the only people who claimed it were people who were truly walking the path. And so you knew that when you went someplace and you learned something, you were learning from somebody who had a clue, right? Now, because it's mostly mainstream, everybody is saying, oh, I'm a shaman. And it's like, okay, well, how did you study to be a shaman? Well, I just took a weekend workshop. It's like, not a shaman, right? There's not a weekend workshop in the world that can make you a shaman. Okay. So, it's this whole piece of, the blind leading the blind, right? I went to when we lived in Richmond, it's a very nascent community that's just really starting to become spiritual. And people are like reading books and going to workshops and then teaching each other what they know from a very limited perspective because they're brand new. And so there's so much misinformation being passed back and forth. And I'm just like, oh my God, right? I'm just like, she didn't just say that. She didn't just do that. I'm like, oh my God, let me fix the energetics. Right? This panic, I got asked to be give a quote for an article. And the lady said, yeah, we're talking about using smudge and smudging with laurel and sage and blah, blah, blah. I went, wait, what? Like, don't smudge with laurel. Smudging, the act of smudging means to burn. If you burn laurel, you will release cyanide into the air and possibly kill yourself and others. Please don't smudge with laurel. But she had found it on the internet somewhere. I'm just like, oh, this is not good, right? Or she had seen a smudge pot. You can do a smudge pot with laurel because you can put it in water and that'll be okay. But she said smudge. And if she had written smudge and laurel, she might have been responsible for people hurting themselves, right?
Usually it's sage, right?
Right. Yeah. Sage, sweetgrass, Palo Santo, although Palo Santo has, it's over-farmed right now and we really shouldn't be using it because the natives who it is their primary religion, they're having a hard time getting it because it's endangered, I think.
I haven't heard of that one before.
Very restricted. So if you please don't buy Palo Santo. But yeah, sage, sweetgrass, cedar, there are lots of things that you can use to clear and bring good energy into your house. Just please research them first on a reputable website. Not
website. You got to check all your resources multiple.
Yeah. And some things are psychoactive, like mugwort. If you burn mugwort, it has slightly psychoactive properties. So you want to be very careful with that. Yeah. So, this is why you want to know what you're doing, right?
Right.
And this is the challenge is that people go, well, I saw it on 8 different websites. It must be true. It's like, not so much, especially not with AI now when everybody's sourcing their stuff from AI. So it's pulling from all the websites, not necessarily from good websites, and AI makes stuff up too. So, it's like, maybe not so much for that. So just be careful who you learn from and where you get your information because it's more readily available now, but it's also a lot more schlock now, right? There's a lot more stuff out there that just is either patently wrong or dangerous, or aphorisms that people have reconstituted and repackaged as their own and said, oh, and they don't even understand what they're saying. So it's kind of a thing.
Well, on that, speaking about people who lead, will you let people know how they can contact you if they want to, work with you on the different, because I know you have different levels that people can work with you.
Yes. Yeah. So my website is kellesparta.com, like you see it on your screen, KELLE. And I have 3 different programs that I work with people on. There's a quiz at the top of the page you can take to figure out which program's right for you. It's the Am I Ready for Shadow Work quiz, right? And you can also check me out at my podcast. I have a new podcast that's Spirit Guides. And you can find it there. I'm actually doing a drawing. So I'm doing once a week, I'm doing a drawing for a free reading on air with me. And then at the end of 8 weeks, I will be doing a drawing for a VIP day with me, which is a $10,000 value. So,
wow. Okay.
So then the way you get in the drawing is you give me a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, and then you send it in to the website. So if you go to spiritguidespodcast.com, you can enter the drawing that way. And then I have an older podcast called Spirit Sherpa that's got like 300 plus episodes that you can deep dive into on all different types of subjects. And so that one's a fun one too. So
awesome.
All sorts of ways to reach me.
Cool. And I'll put all those in those links in the show notes as well. And people can go listen to you and enter your drawing. That'll be fun. That's a fun way. And I thank you for being on here with me on the Live Greater podcast, spending this time and sharing all this good stuff with us. So thank you.
Thank you. And really appreciate the hard work you're doing here. And I'm sure your listeners do too.
Thank you so much.